The big space station called Nexus was always busy. Ships came and went every hour. Aliens from all over the galaxy traded goods, shared news, and told stories. The station had hundreds of bars, shops, and meeting places. It was the biggest trading post in known space, but there was one story that everyone talked about. In every bar, in every corner, aliens whispered about the death track. They called it Kazrath's Gauntlet. Some said it with fear. Others said it with respect. All of them said it was impossible to beat. The death track was built by the Kazrath Empire 300 years ago. The Kazrathi were cruel aliens who loved to watch others suffer. They built the track as a test. They wanted to see who was the strongest, the smartest, the bravest in all the galaxy. They made it 1 mile long and filled it with traps that could kill in 100 different ways. The first part of the track had gravity wells. These were spots where gravity was so strong it could crush bones like twigs. Aliens who tried to cross them were flattened in seconds. Their bodies were found later, thin as paper. The second part had plasma corridors. These were hallways filled with burning hot gas. The gas was so hot it could turn flesh to ash in a heartbeat. Some brave aliens tried to run through fast. They never made it. Only their shadows were left burned into the walls. The third part had puzzle chambers. These rooms tested the mind, not the body. But the puzzles were designed to drive thinking beings crazy. Many aliens went into these rooms with sharp minds. They came out screaming, if they came out at all. Most just sat in the corners, rocking back and forth until they died. The last part had kinetic barriers. These were walls of pure force that hit like invisible hammers. They could turn solid bone into liquid in less than a second. The lucky ones died quickly. The unlucky ones lived long enough to feel their insides turn to soup dot for 300 years. Aliens from every corner of space tried the death track. Over 10,000 beings had entered. Warriors from the proud Valorian clans tried it. Scholars from the wise Etherian colleges tried it. Even machine beings made of metal and circuits tried it. None of them survived. The best anyone had ever done was a Valorian war chief named Thrak the Unstoppable. He made it 7/10 of a mile before a particle beam turned him into glowing dust. His record had stood for 50 years. Most aliens could not even make it half that far. The Galactic Council studied the track for decades. They brought their best scientists and engineers. They used computers that could think faster than any living brain. After years of study, they made an official statement. They said the death track was impossible for any biological creature to survive. They marked it as a place where no one should ever go. But still, aliens kept trying. Some wanted glory. Some wanted to prove their species was the strongest. Some were just tired of living and wanted to die in a way that would be remembered. The death track became famous across the galaxy. Songs were written about it. Children played games pretending to run through it. Everyone knew about Kazrath's Gauntlet. On this day, like many others, aliens in the bars of Nexus Station talked about the death track. They shared stories of the brave souls who had tried and failed. They argued about which species might have the best chance. They all agreed on one thing, though. No one would ever beat it. In a dark corner of Murphy's Cantina, a group of aliens sat around a table. There was Zek, a tall blue Valorian with scars on his arms. There was Quinn, a small green trader with big eyes. There was Morth, a rock-like being from the Granite Worlds. They were drinking something that glowed purple and talking in low voices. "I heard another one tried last week," Zek said. He took a long drink and shook his head. A crystalline from the far rim thought his hard shell would protect him. "What happened?" Quinn asked, leaning forward. "Made it to the plasma corridors," Morth said in his slow, grinding voice. "Lasted about 3 seconds. They found some crystal dust, but that was all." The aliens nodded sadly. They had heard stories like this many times before. "My grandfather Always said the Kazrathi were devils, Quinn whispered. They built that track to show the galaxy that nothing could beat them. Even after their empire fell, their trap still kills anyone who tries. The worst part is not the dying, Zek said. The worst part is that it gives hope to fools. Every year, some young warrior thinks they will be different. They think they will be the one to beat it. The track has killed beings from every known species, Morth added. Strong ones, smart ones, fast ones. It does not care. Death is death. They sat in silence for a moment, thinking about all the lives the death track had taken. Around them, other aliens talked about business deals and shipping routes. But the shadow of Kazrath's gauntlet hung over everything like a dark cloud. That was when they heard it. A sound that made them all turn around. Someone was laughing. The laugh was loud and clear, not the bitter laugh of someone who had given up hope. It was the kind of laugh someone made when they heard a really good joke. It was happy and free, like the sound of water running over rocks. The aliens looked around the bar, trying to find who was making the sound. They saw her sitting at the bar counter alone. She was small compared to most of the aliens in the room. Her skin was pale pink, and she had long dark hair tied back. She wore simple work clothes, the kind cargo haulers used. She was human. Humans were new to the galaxy. Most aliens had heard of them, but few had met one. They came from a small blue planet on the edge of civilized space. They had only been traveling between stars for a few decades. Most aliens thought they were weak and simple creatures, but this human was laughing like she had just heard the funniest thing in the universe. She slapped the bar counter with her hand and wiped tears from her eyes. "Excuse me," Zek called out. His warrior pride was hurt by her laughter. "What do you find so amusing?" The human turned around on her stool. Her eyes were bright and still full of laughter. "Oh, sorry. I was listening to you guys talk about this death track thing. It just sounds so familiar." "Familiar?" Quinn squeaked. "You have something like Kazrath's gauntlet on your world." "Well, not exactly," the human said. She walked over to their table, carrying her drink. "But we have obstacle courses in our military, and we have these things called amusement parks where people pay money to get scared. Your death track sounds like someone took an obstacle course and an amusement park and mixed them together." The alien stared at her like she had grown a second head. "You think the death track is amusing?" Morth asked slowly. "Kind of, yeah," the human said, sitting down without being invited. "I mean gravity wells, plasma corridors, puzzle rooms, kinetic barriers. It sounds like a really extreme version of stuff we do for fun back home." "For fun?" Zek's voice was getting louder. Other aliens in the bar started to look their way. 10,000 beings have died trying to beat that track. 10,000? The human whistled softly. "That does seem like a lot. But has anyone ever actually studied it? Like really studied how it works?" "Of course," Quinn said. "The Galactic Council spent years analyzing it. They declared it impossible to survive." The human took a sip of her drink and made a face. Whatever aliens drank, it was not meant for human taste buds. "Yeah, but did they study it like warriors? Or did they study it like engineers? What is the difference?" Morth asked. "Warriors look at something and think about how to fight it," the human explained. "Engineers look at something and think about how it works. If someone built it, then it has rules. If it has rules, then there are ways to work with those rules." Zek stood up suddenly. His blue face was turning purple with anger. "You mock the honored dead. You laugh at the greatest challenge in the galaxy. You humans know nothing of honor or courage." The human looked up at him calmly. "Hey, I'm not mocking anyone. I'm just saying that maybe everyone has been thinking about this the wrong way." "Then prove it," Zek snarled. "If you think Kazrath's gauntlet is so easy, why do you not try it yourself?" The human was quiet for a moment. She looked at Zek, then at the other aliens, then at her drink. The whole bar had gone silent. Everyone was watching them. "You know what?" the human said finally. "Maybe I will." Before anyone could stop him, Zek pulled out a data pad. His thick fingers moved across the screen. "There. I have just registered you for an attempt at Kazrith's gauntlet. The system requires a response within 1 standard hour." The human looked at the data pad. Her name was now on the official list of challengers. Sarah Chun, it said. Species, human. Status, confirmed. "Well," Sarah said, looking around at all the staring aliens, "I guess I should probably sober up before I try to beat your unbeatable death trap." She finished her drink in one gulp, stood up, and walked toward the door. As she left, they heard her laughing again. The alien sat in stunned silence. Somewhere in the galaxy, another being had just signed up to die on Kazrith's gauntlet. But this time, it was a human dot, and for some reason, that felt different. Sarah Chun woke up the next morning with a headache that felt like someone was using a hammer inside her skull. The alien alcohol from Murphy's Cantina was much stronger than anything from Earth. She rolled out of her narrow bunk on her cargo ship and stumbled to the small bathroom. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman who looked like she had been hit by a transport truck. Her dark hair was messy, her eyes were red, and she had a bruise on her cheek from where she had fallen asleep on her data pad. Her data pad. Something about her data pad was important. Sarah picked it up and turned on the screen. What she saw made her stomach drop to her feet. There, in bright red letters, was an official document from the Nexus Station Authority. It was a legal contract. It said she had agreed to attempt Kazrith's gauntlet within 72 hours. "Oh no," Sarah said out loud. "Oh no, oh no." She read the contract 3 times, hoping it was some kind of mistake. But it was real. Her name was there. Her thumbprint was there. Even her ship's registration number was there. The contract was legal and binding under galactic law. The worst part was at the bottom. If she tried to back out now, she would be banned from all civilized space stations for the rest of her life. She would become a ghost, unable to land anywhere, unable to trade, unable to buy fuel or food. It was almost the same as a death sentence, but if she actually tried the death track, it really would be a death sentence. Sarah sat on her bunk and put her head in her hands. She tried to remember exactly what had happened the night before. The blue alien, Zek, had been angry about something. She had been laughing about the death track. Then he had challenged her, and she had something stupid. "I'm an idiot," she said to herself. "I'm a complete idiot." A soft chime came from her communication system. Sarah looked at the screen and saw she had 47 new messages. Most of them were from news services across the galaxy. Word had already spread that a human was going to attempt Kazrith's gauntlet. She opened one of the messages. It was from Galactic News Network. The headline made her feel sick. "First human to attempt death track. Brave pioneer or foolish newcomer." Another message was from her boss back on Earth. It was short and not very friendly. "Chun, what the hell are you doing? Call me now." Sarah turned off the communication system. She did not want to talk to anyone right now. She needed to think. She made herself a cup of coffee with her small machine. The coffee was one of the few things from Earth that tasted the same everywhere in the galaxy. As she drank it, she tried to figure out what to do. She could run. She could take her ship and fly to the edge of the galaxy, where there were no laws and no contracts. But that would mean giving up her job, her life, everything she had worked for. And eventually, the authorities would find her. She could ask for help. Maybe there was a lawyer somewhere who could find a way out of the contract, but she had read the fine print. The contract was solid. There were no loopholes, or she could actually try to beat the death track. Sarah almost laughed at that thought, almost. But then she stopped. Why had she been laughing last night? What had seemed so funny about a track that had killed 10,000 beings? She went to her ship's computer and started searching for information about Kazrath's gauntlet. What she found was surprising. There was a lot of information about who had tried it and how they had died. But there was very little information about how the track actually worked. Most of the reports just said things like impossible gravity fields and deadly plasma chambers. They did not explain exactly how these things worked or why they were deadly. It was like reading about a machine, but only hearing about what happened to people who got hurt by it. Sarah was an engineer. She had studied how things worked for most of her life. She knew that anything built by thinking beings had to follow certain rules. Even the most advanced alien technology had limits and patterns. She spent the next 6 hours reading everything she could find about the Kazrath Empire. The Kazrothi had been cruel, but they had not been stupid. They were master builders who loved to show off their skills. They built things to last and to impress. More importantly, they built things to entertain. The death track was not just a test or a trap, it was a show. The Kazrothi had invited people from across their empire to watch beings try to beat it. They had sold tickets and made money from it. If it was entertainment, then it had to be possible to survive. A show where everyone died quickly would be boring. The audience would go home. The Kazrathi were too smart to build something boring. Sarah made another cup of coffee and kept reading. She found old records from the Kazrath Empire's archives. Most of it was in ancient Kazrathi language, but her ship's computer could translate some of it. What she found made her sit up straight. There were references to performance guidelines and audience engagement protocols. There were mentions of safety margins and spectacle enhancement. The death track was not designed to be impossible. It was designed to look impossible while actually being very, very difficult. The difference was important. Sarah stood up and started pacing around her small ship. Her headache was gone now, replaced by the kind of excitement she felt when she was solving a hard problem. She started making lists. What did she know about gravity wells? What did she know about plasma physics? What did she know about puzzle solving? What did she know about kinetic barriers? As she worked, she realized something that made her smile. She knew more about these things than most aliens did. Humans had been dealing with dangerous environments for thousands of years. They had been building obstacle courses and training grounds since they first started fighting wars. The difference was in how they thought about problems. Most aliens seemed to approach the death track like a test they had to pass. They tried to be strong enough, or smart enough, or fast enough to beat each challenge. But humans approached problems differently. They looked for shortcuts. They changed the rules. They found ways to make hard things easy and impossible things possible. Sarah made a new list. This one was not about what she knew. It was about what she needed to find out. How exactly did each part of the track work? What were the patterns? What were the weaknesses? She spent the next 12 hours digging through technical databases and old engineering reports. She found blueprints that had been filed away and forgotten. She found maintenance records that showed how the track systems were repaired over the years. Slowly, a picture began to form in her mind. The death track was not one big trap. It was dozens of smaller traps that worked together. Each trap had been designed to work in a specific way against a specific type of challenger. But what if someone approached it in a way the builders had never imagined? By the time night came to the station, Sarah had filled her datapad with notes and diagrams. She had a plan forming in her head. It was crazy and dangerous and probably would not work. But it was better than just running into the track and hoping for the best. She also had a shopping list. Sarah left her ship and walked through the station's commercial district. The shops that sold survival gear and emergency supplies were open all night. She bought rope, adhesive tape, a small crowbar, energy bars, water bottles, and a dozen other things that made the shopkeeper look at her strangely. "Are you really going to try the death track?" the shopkeeper asked. He was a small, furry alien with big ears. "Looks like it," Sarah said. "Why?" The alien asked. Sarah thought about it for a moment. Because someone told me it was impossible. She paid for her supplies and walked back to her ship. Behind her, she could hear the shopkeeper talking to other customers about the crazy human who was going to die tomorrow. Sarah did not feel crazy. She felt excited. For the first time since she had woken up, she was looking forward to trying the death track. After all, humans had been doing impossible things since they first learned to walk upright. Why should this be different? She spent the rest of the night preparing. She read her notes again and again until she knew them by heart. She checked her equipment and made sure everything worked. She ate a good meal and tried to get some sleep. Tomorrow, she was going to attempt something that had killed 10,000 beings. But tonight, for the first time in her life, Sarah Chun felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The galaxy was about to learn something new about humans. They were going to learn that when a human said something was impossible, they meant it was just really, really hard. And humans love things that were really, really hard. The day of the attempt arrived with more attention than Sarah had expected. When she walked from her ship to the death track entrance, she found crowds of aliens lining the corridors of Nexus Station. Some held signs, others had cameras. Many were placing bets on how far she would make it before dying. Sarah wore her work clothes and carried a backpack full of supplies that looked strange to the aliens watching. They expected to see weapons or armor or high-tech equipment. Instead, she had brought duct tape, zip ties, a crowbar, energy bars, and a thermos full of coffee. Is that her plan? One alien whispered to another. Tape and snacks? Humans are even stranger than we thought. The other replied. The entrance to Kazrath's gauntlet was a massive archway made of black metal. Above it, ancient Kazrathi writing spelled out words that translated to, "Only the worthy may pass." Below that, someone had added a sign in modern galactic standard that said, "Current death count, 10,847. Sarah looked at the number and shook her head. Well, let's try not to make it 10,848. A small army of officials, reporters, and spectators had gathered for the opening ceremony. The station commander, a tall alien with purple skin and 4 arms, read from a prepared statement about the history of the death track and the legal requirements for attempting it. Sarah only half listened. She was studying the entrance and the first visible part of the track beyond it. Everything she had read about in the technical reports was right there in front of her. The gravity wells were exactly where the blueprints said they would be. The plasma corridor entrances looked just like the maintenance diagrams had shown. "Sarah Chun of Earth," the commander announced. "Do you understand that attempting Kazrath's gauntlet will almost certainly result in your death?" "I understand," Sarah said. "Do you understand that no rescue will be attempted if you become trapped or injured?" "I understand." "Do you understand that this attempt is being broadcast live across 12 star systems?" Sarah blinked. "Wait, what?" "The media rights were sold 3 hours ago," the commander explained. "Galactic Broadcasting Network paid quite well for exclusive coverage." Sarah looked around and saw the cameras pointed at her. Millions of beings across the galaxy were watching and waiting to see how quickly she would die. The thought should have scared her. Instead, it made her angry. "Great," she muttered. "No pressure at all." The commander stepped aside. The massive doors of the death track began to open with a sound like thunder. Beyond them, Sarah could see the first challenge, the gravity wells. The crowd fell silent. Even the reporters stopped talking. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the station's life support systems. Sarah took a deep breath, adjusted her backpack, and stepped forward. The first gravity well was exactly where she expected it to be. According to the technical specs, it was set to 15 times normal gravity, enough to crush most beings instantly. She could see the compressed remains of previous challengers scattered around the edges of the field, but Sarah had studied the maintenance reports. She knew something the previous challengers had not. The gravity wells were not constant. They pulsed in a pattern designed to catch anyone who tried to run straight through. Sarah pulled out her crowbar and threw it into the gravity well. It fell toward the center, then suddenly shot sideways as the field shifted. The pattern was exactly what the old Khazrathi engineering notes had described. "Interesting," she said, loud enough for the cameras to pick up. "It's like a very deadly pinball machine." She waited, counting under her breath. The gravity field pulsed every 12 seconds. During the pulse, objects were thrown to the sides. Between pulses, there was a safe path straight through the center. Sarah timed her run perfectly. She sprinted into the gravity well just as the field reset, ran straight down the middle while the field was calm, and dove out the other side just before the next pulse. Behind her, her crowbar was crushed into a tiny metal ball. The crowd watching the broadcast was silent. No one had ever made it through the first gravity. Well, that easily. Sarah dusted herself off and looked at the next challenge, the plasma corridors. These were narrow hallways filled with superheated gas that moved in complex patterns. The gas was hot enough to burn through most materials in seconds. She pulled out her data pad and checked her notes. The plasma moved in waves like ocean tides. But unlike the ocean, these waves followed a precise mathematical pattern. The Khazrathi had been very proud of their engineering. Sarah opened her thermos and took a sip of coffee. "Okay, let's dance." She stepped into the first plasma corridor and immediately began moving in a way that looked like insanity to the watching aliens. She ducked, spun, jumped, and rolled in a complex pattern that seemed to have no logic. But to Sarah, it was like following a dance she had memorized. The plasma waves swept around her, missing by inches. Where the waves touched the walls, the metal glowed red hot. But Sarah moved between them like water flowing around rocks. "How is she doing that?" one of the reporters whispered into his camera. "She's predicting the pattern," another replied. "But that should be impossible. The plasma moves too fast for organic reflexes. They were wrong." Sarah was not predicting the pattern, she was following it. The Khazrathi engineers had designed the plasma to move in a way that would challenge fighters and athletes. But they had not designed it to challenge someone who approached it like a complicated piece of machinery. Sarah reached the end of the plasma corridors without a single burn. She was not even breathing hard. The next challenge was the puzzle chambers. These were rooms filled with complex riddles and logic problems. Most challengers spent hours trying to solve them. Many went insane from the mental pressure. Sarah walked into the first puzzle chamber and looked around. The walls were covered with symbols and equations. In the center of the room was a pedestal with a complex mechanical device on it. According to the rules displayed on the wall, she had to solve the mathematical puzzle to unlock the door to the next chamber. The puzzle involved calculating the orbital mechanics of a 7-planet system with 3 different suns. Sarah read the problem once, then put her data pad away. She walked over to the mechanical device and studied it for about 30 seconds. Then she pulled out her duct tape. "What is she doing?" The aliens watching asked each other. Sarah taped over several sensors on the device, then used her zip ties to hold down some of the moving parts. The machine made a confused beeping sound. Then the door to the next chamber opened. "She cheated," one alien said in shock. "She exploited a design flaw," another corrected. The puzzle was designed to test intelligence, but the door mechanism was separate. She just bypassed the test entirely. Sarah waved at the camera as she walked through the door. Engineering beats mathematics every time. The next few chambers tried to challenge her with different types of puzzles. Logic riddles, memory tests, spatial reasoning problems. Sarah solved some of them the normal way. Others she bypassed using techniques that would have horrified the original Khazrathi engineers. In one chamber, she was supposed to arrange colored crystals in a specific pattern. Instead, she used her crowbar to smash the crystals and trigger The emergency reset protocol. The door opened immediately. In another chamber, she was supposed to answer a riddle about the nature of existence. Sarah's answer was, "I don't know, and I have deliveries to make." The computer, programmed only to accept philosophical responses, crashed trying to process such a practical answer. By the time Sarah reached the halfway point of the death track, something had changed in the way the galaxy was watching her. The BROADCAST had started as a death watch. People had tuned in to see how spectacularly a human would fail. But Sarah was not failing. She was not even struggling. She moved through the track like someone taking a difficult but manageable test. When she encountered problems, she solved them. When she encountered traps, she avoided them. When she encountered impossible challenges, she changed the rules. At the halfway mark, Sarah stopped and sat down on a bench that had been built for Kazrathi spectators. She opened her backpack, pulled out an energy bar, and began eating lunch. Is she taking a break?" one reporter asked in disbelief. Sarah pulled out her thermos and poured herself a cup of coffee. Steam rose from the cup in the cold air of the station. She looked directly at the nearest camera and raised her cup in a small salute. "Halfway there," she said cheerfully. "This is actually pretty fun once you figure out the patterns." The aliens watching the broadcast did not know what to think. No one had ever made it this far. No one had ever treated the death track like an interesting puzzle to be solved. No one had ever stopped for lunch in the middle of Kazrath's gauntlet. But Sarah Chun was not like anyone who had tried before. She was human. And humans, the galaxy was beginning to realize, approached impossible problems in ways that other species had never imagined. Sarah finished her coffee, packed up her supplies, and stood up. The second half of the track was supposed to be much more dangerous than the first half. The challenges ahead were designed to be genuinely impossible to survive. But as Sarah walked toward the next section, she was smiling. She had always enjoyed solving hard problems, and this was turning out to be the most interesting problem she had ever encountered. The galaxy watched and waited to see what the human would do next. The second half of the death track was different from the first half. Sarah could feel it as soon as she stepped into the next section. The air was colder here, and there was a strange humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Walls were covered with warning signs in dozens of languages. They all said the same thing. Beyond this point, death is certain. No being has ever survived these challenges. Turn back now. Sarah read the signs and kept walking. She had come too far to stop now. The first challenge in this section was something called the temporal maze. Sarah had read about it in the old Kazrathi files, but the descriptions had been confusing. Now she understood why the maze was not made of walls or barriers. It was made of time itself. When Sarah stepped into it, she suddenly found herself walking through the same corridor over and over again. She would take 10 steps forward, turn a corner, and somehow be back where she started. According to the technical documents, the maze trapped the consciousness of anyone who entered it. They would walk in circles through time, experiencing the same few minutes forever, until their minds broke or their bodies died from exhaustion. Sarah walked through the loop 3 times, trying to understand how it worked. On the 4th loop, she noticed something interesting. There was a small scratch on one of the walls that appeared and disappeared in a pattern. The scratch was not random. It was a marker left by the maze's programming. The Kazrathi had built this trap to confuse and break minds that thought in linear time. But they had needed reference points for their own engineers to navigate during construction and maintenance. The scratch was one of those reference points. Sarah pulled out her duct tape and tore off a small piece. As she walked through the loop again, she stuck the tape over the scratch at the exact moment it appeared. The maze's programming did not know what to do with an object that existed both inside and outside its time loop. The system hesitated for just a moment. That moment was enough. Sarah dove through a gap in the temporal field that should not have existed. and suddenly, she was on the other side of the maze. Behind her, the maze made a sound like a computer having an error. The time loop collapsed in on itself and went silent. "Well, that was weird," Sarah said, brushing dust off her clothes. The next challenge was something that Kazrathi called the probability cannon. Sarah had never seen anything like it before. It was a large weapon mounted on the wall that could somehow change the odds of things happening. The cannon was aimed at the narrow bridge Sarah needed to cross. According to the signs, it would fire improbability bolts that would make unlikely deaths become certain. A person might suddenly have a heart attack, or their bones might spontaneously break, or they might simply stop existing for no reason at all. The weapon was already charging up, making a whining sound that grew louder every second. Sarah had maybe 30 seconds before it fired. She looked at the cannon, then at the bridge, then at her backpack. Then she did something that no previous challenger had ever tried. She ran toward the cannon instead of away from it. Sarah climbed up the weapon's mounting bracket and started pulling out cables with her hands. The cannon was built to fire at targets on the bridge, not to deal with someone crawling all over it, like a monkey. "Warning, warning," a recorded voice said in Ancient. "Kazrathi. Unauthorized personnel detected near probability weapon." "Yeah, that's me," Sarah said, pulling out more cables. "Unauthorized as hell." The cannon tried to turn and aim at her, but Sarah had already disconnected its targeting system. The weapon spun in circles, completely confused about where she was. Then, Sarah found what she was looking for: the cannon's probability calculation computer. It was a small box covered with buttons and displays. According to her research, this computer decided what unlikely events would become certain. Sarah opened the box and looked at the circuitry inside. She had never seen probability manipulation technology before, but circuits were circuits. She pulled out a handful of zip ties and started connecting random wires to other random wires. The computer began displaying error messages in several languages. The probability calculations became more and more confused. Instead of making bad things certain, the cannon started making impossible things happen. A flower grew out of the metal floor. A small rainbow appeared in the air for no reason. Sarah's empty coffee cup filled itself with fresh coffee. "Well, that's convenient," Sarah said. Taking a sip, the probability cannon gave up trying to understand what was happening and shut itself down. Sarah climbed down and walked across the bridge while the weapon sparked and smoked behind her. The final challenge was the worst one. The Kazrathi called it the philosophical paradox chamber. It was a room that could read a person's mind and create impossible questions that would drive them insane. Sarah walked into the chamber and immediately felt something strange happening. It was like someone was looking through her thoughts, searching for something to use against her. The room began to change around her. The walls became covered with mirrors that showed different versions of herself. Some versions were successful and happy. Others were failures and miserable. All of them were asking her the same question: "Who are you really?" "I'm Sarah Chun," she said out loud. "I deliver cargo and I'm trying not to die. But who are you really?" The voices from the mirrors asked, "What is your true nature? What is your purpose in the universe? Why do you exist?" Sarah had read about this trap in the Kazrathi files. It was designed to catch beings who thought too deeply about existence. Philosophers, scientists, and religious leaders had all been driven mad by questions that had no answers. But Sarah was not a philosopher. She was an engineer. "I don't know," she said simply. "And I don't really care." The mirrors showed her more versions of herself. Versions where she was rich, versions where she was poor, versions where she had never left Earth, versions where she had conquered the galaxy. Which one is the real you? The voices demanded. "Choose. You must choose your true self." "They're all real," Sarah said, "and none of them are real. And it doesn't matter because I have work to do." The chamber tried harder. It showed her the faces of everyone she had ever known, asking her to explain her relationships with them. It showed her maps of the universe, asking her to find her place in it. It showed her complex equations about the nature of reality, demanding that she solve them. Sarah ignored all of it. She walked straight through the room while philosophical questions swirled around her like a storm. When the chamber realized she was not going to engage with its paradoxes, it became desperate. "Wait!" the voices cried. "You cannot ignore the fundamental questions of existence. What is the meaning of life? What happens after death? What is the nature of consciousness?" Sarah stopped at the door to the next section and turned around. "Look, I'm sure those are very important questions for someone, but I've got bills to pay and a schedule to keep. Maybe ask someone who has time for this stuff." She opened the door and walked through. Behind her, the philosophical paradox chamber made a sound like a computer crashing. It had been programmed to handle every possible response to deep philosophical questions. It had no programming for someone who simply refused to care about them. The chamber shut down completely, leaving only silence. Sarah found herself in a long corridor that led to the final section of the death track. According to her research, only one challenge remained. It was called the Ultimate Fear Chamber, and it was supposed to be impossible for any living being to survive. But Sarah had already survived 3 impossible challenges by doing things that the Khazrathi had never imagined. She was starting to understand something important about the death track. It had been built by beings who thought in certain patterns and followed certain rules. Humans did not always follow the same rules. Sarah checked her supplies. She still had some duct tape, a few zip ties, and most of her coffee. Whatever the final challenge was, she would face it the same way she had faced all the others. She would look at it like an engineer, not like a warrior or a philosopher. She would find a way to make the impossible possible. Behind her, 3 sections of the most dangerous obstacle course in the galaxy lay broken and silent. Ahead of her waited the final test. Sarah took a deep breath, adjusted her backpack, and walked toward whatever the Khazrathi thought would be her ultimate doom. She was still smiling. The galaxy watched and wondered what kind of beings these humans really were. And some of them were starting to realize that they might not want to find out. The final chamber of Khazrath's gauntlet was different from all the others. When Sarah walked through the door, she found herself in a room that looked exactly like the cargo bay of her own ship. Every detail was perfect, down to the coffee stains on her workbench and the scratch marks on the floor where she had dropped heavy containers. "Okay, that's creepy," Sarah said, looking around. The room felt real, but Sarah knew it was not. This was the ultimate fear chamber. According to the Khazrathi files, it would read her mind and create her worst fear as a living enemy. Then she would have to fight that fear to the death. Sarah had wondered what her worst fear would turn out to be. Death? Pain? Failure? Being alone in space forever? She had imagined fighting monsters or facing terrible accidents she had not expected. Paperwork. The air in the fake cargo bay shimmered, and suddenly Sarah was not alone. Sitting at a desk that had not been there a moment before was a figure that made her heart sink. It was a thin, pale man in a gray suit. He had small, mean eyes behind thick glasses. In front of him were stacks and stacks of official forms. "Sarah." "Chun," the figure said in a voice like nails on metal. "Internal Revenue Service, Earth Division. You are 3 years behind on your tax filings." Sarah stared at the man. Of all the cosmic horrors the galaxy could throw at her, this was what her subconscious had picked as her ultimate fear. Not death, not pain, not even being trapped in space forever. "Bureaucracy. You have got to be kidding me," she said. "I never kid about taxes," the IRS agent said. He picked up the first form from his stack. "Form 2847B, Interplanetary Cargo Declaration. You failed to file this for the years." 2522, 2523, and 2524. I was working off-world. Sarah protested. The forms weren't available in digital format. Ignorance of tax law is not an excuse, the agent replied. He made a note on the form with a red pen. Penalty, 5,000 credits, plus interest. More desks appeared around the room. Each one had another agent with another stack of forms. Sarah found herself surrounded by the nightmare of every independent cargo hauler. A tax audit. Form 3391C, Off-World Income Reporting, said the second agent. You claimed deductions for fuel costs but failed to provide receipts. The receipts were in vegan script, Sarah said. Your computers can't read vegan script. Not our problem. The third agent chimed in. Form 4502X, Equipment Depreciation Schedule. You listed your cargo loader as a business expense, but also used it to move your personal belongings. Sarah looked around the room at the growing army of bureaucrats. Each one had more forms, more penalties, more impossible requirements. She could spend the rest of her life trying to fill out their paperwork and never finish. This was supposed to be the challenge that killed her. She was supposed to fight her ultimate fear until one of them destroyed the other. The problem was, she had already been through tax season. Multiple times. This was not her ultimate fear anymore. This was just Tuesday. Okay, Sarah said, walking over to the first desk. Let's get this over with. She picked up the tax form and looked at it. Then she did something that made all the agents freeze in terror. She filled it out wrong. On purpose. In the box that asked for her income, she wrote sum. In the box that asked for her expenses, she wrote more than that. In the box that asked for her signature, she drew a little smiley face. You can't do that, the first agent gasped. Sure I can, Sarah said. She handed him the form. There, filed. She moved to the second desk and picked up that form. In the section about off-world income, she wrote, made money, spent money, mind your own business. For the required receipts, she drew pictures of stick figures dancing. This is completely improper, the second agent cried. Yep, Sarah agreed cheerfully. She moved to the third desk. The agents began to panic. They were programmed to handle people who were afraid of them, who tried desperately to fill out the forms correctly, who begged for mercy and extensions. They had no idea what to do with someone who was deliberately filing incorrect paperwork and enjoying it. Stop, the first agent shouted. You're making a mockery of the system. The system is already a mockery, Sarah replied. She picked up a whole stack of forms and started filling them out with random answers, favorite color instead of income, her ship's registration number instead of her social security number, song lyrics instead of expense reports. This will result in massive penalties, the third agent warned. Good luck collecting them, Sarah said. I'm in a different galaxy. The agents looked at each other in confusion. Their ultimate weapon was the threat of legal consequences. But Sarah was treating their threats like jokes. She was not afraid of them anymore. She was annoyed by them, but not afraid. Ma'am, the first agent said desperately, if you continue this behavior, we will have to escalate to our supervisor. Oh no, Sarah said in a fake scared voice. Not the supervisor. What will they do? Give me more forms to fill out wrong. The room began to shake. The ultimate fear chamber was not designed to handle someone who had stopped being afraid of their fear. The whole system was breaking down. We demand you take this seriously. All the agents shouted at once. Sarah stopped filling out forms and looked at them. For a moment, she almost felt sorry for them. They were just doing their jobs, even if their jobs were impossible and stupid. Look, she said, I know you're trying to do your thing here, but I already went through this exact same audit 3 years ago. It took 6 months, cost me a fortune in legal fees, and in the end they decided I didn't know anything because of some rule about interstellar commerce that nobody had told me about. She walked toward the door that had appeared at the far end of the room. So you know what? I'm done being afraid of you. Do your worst, send me to collections, freeze my assets. I'll just keep delivering cargo until it gets sorted out. The agents made one last desperate attempt to stop her. Wait. You haven't signed Form 9847Z. You need to provide 3 forms of identification. You need to schedule a follow-up appointment. Sarah reached the door and put her hand on the handle. She turned back to look at the army of bureaucrats. I have a better idea. Why don't you guys figure out which forms I actually need to file, make them available in a format I can read, and send me a simple bill for what I actually owe? You know, like every other civilized species in the galaxy does. She opened the door and stepped through. Behind her, the ultimate fear chamber collapsed into digital static and went silent. It had been programmed to create and maintain fears, not to deal with someone who had faced their fears so many times that it had become a minor annoyance instead of a terror. Sarah found herself standing in a simple white room with a single door marked Exit. She had done it. She had completed Kazrith's gauntlet. She was the first being in 300 years to survive the death track. She walked through the exit door and found herself back on Nexus Station. The crowds that had gathered to watch her die were now staring at her in complete silence. No one moved. No one spoke. They just stared at the impossible sight of someone walking out of the death track alive. Sarah looked around at all the shocked faces. So, she said, is there a gift shop? I want to get a t-shirt that says I survived this thing. The silence stretched for another few seconds. Then someone in the crowd started to laugh. Then someone else. Soon the entire station was filled with the sound of dozens of different species laughing together. Sarah had not just survived the impossible. She had made it look easy. She had turned the galaxy's greatest challenge into an interesting engineering problem and a minor paperwork inconvenience. Excuse me, a small alien with big eyes approached her. I'm from the Galactic News Network. How did you do it? How did you beat challenges that killed 10,000 beings? Sarah thought about the question for a moment. I guess I just didn't think of them as challenges, she said. I thought of them as problems. And humans are really good at solving problems. But what about the impossible parts? Another reporter asked. Impossible just means nobody has figured out how to do it yet, Sarah replied. Humans don't really believe in impossible. We just believe in really, really hard. She checked her watch. Speaking of which, I have a delivery to make in the Centauri system. Anyone know where I can get fuel for my ship? As Sarah walked away from the death track, the galaxy began to realize something important. They had just met a species that did not understand the word impossible. A species that looked at the most dangerous challenge in known space and saw an interesting puzzle to solve. The Kazrothi Empire had built the death track to prove that some things could not be beaten. Instead, they had created the perfect test to show what humans were capable of when someone told them something was impossible. Sarah Chun went back to her ship, filed her flight plan, and left Nexus Station. She had deliveries to make and bills to pay. Behind her, the death track stood silent and empty. For the first time in 300 years, nobody wanted to try it. After all, if a human could beat it while complaining about paperwork, how impressive could it really be? The galaxy had learned something new about humans that day. When humans encountered the impossible, they didn't give up or get scared. They laughed, rolled up their sleeves, and got to work. And that, everyone agreed, was either very inspiring or very terrifying, depending on whether you were on their side.